My F350 has almost left me stranded once again.
The last time you guys saw the 7.3 Powerstroke F350, I had finally mended some strange steering issues, where the steering wheel was moving on its own, and the truck felt like it was gonna huck itself off the road.
It was undrivable, and it was off the road for months until we found a fix.
And since then, the truck was doing great, until it wasn't. 2 hours away from home, while getting parts for the Caddy, the truck started vibrating really bad, making like a horrible grinding humming sound in the front end.
If I hit a bump, it would start doing it, until I hit another bump. It was quite the odd sensation. It was like I was driving on rumble strips when I wasn't. Whatever the problem is, I'm fixing it now, because there's no way I'm letting this thing sit again for months.
So it's time for some experimentation. First, we're gonna jack one side of the front end up and pull the tire in and out. Kinda rock it around and see if there's any sort of weird movement. And to my surprise, there didn't seem to be. Then I took a long bar under the tire and slightly pulled up to see if the ball joint on this side had any play. Not that it was the culprit of the sound and vibrations I was hearing now, but doesn't hurt to check while we're in here, especially with the track record I have of front-end problems. So far, so good. Interesting. Now I'm gonna spin the wheel to see if there's any sort of resistance or if I can hear the whirling, grinding sound. I can definitely hear the brake rotor on this side hitting the pad because it's slightly warped, but I can also hear something a little peculiar in around the hub area.
Definitely doesn't sound right. Let's try locking the hub. Maybe not. There it goes.
It sounded about the same with the hub locked or unlocked. Intriguing.
Still doesn't sound very good.
Thanks to some fellas in a Ford forum, I'm next going to try putting the transfer case in 4 high with the hub unlocked to see if it'd do anything.
Still doing it.
Still no change. Interesting. Now it's time to put the other side in the air to see if it makes the same noises as the passenger side. And surprised was I.
Sounds a lot quieter. Definitely quieter.
It seemed to spin a lot easier too. Here's the driver's side compared to the passenger.
So there's definitely a whole lot more sound coming from this side than there is from the driver's side. So I definitely think I heard it on this side while I was driving, and obviously makes a lot more noise. It also spins a little bit harder than the other side.
So I took to the Ford forums, where I found quite a bit of help on the issues I've had with this truck, and learned that the spindle bearings, or needle bearings as they're sometimes called, are a common problem on these trucks. The spindle bearing is the innermost bearing on the hub assembly that the axle actually sits on. The common wheel bearing to fail is the larger outer bearing. But from the sounds of it, literally and figuratively, the small inner spindle bearing could be our issue. But here's the next issue. That small bearing can be replaced, and for quite cheap. It's only a $10 to $20 part, but requires the whole hub assembly to come out. So, the question is, do I replace the small inner spindle bearing and call it a day? Or do I replace the whole hub assembly since it's coming out anyway? About the same amount of work, but an almost $200 price difference. And still, I don't even know if this is our issue. So, later that evening, I waited for neighbor Steve, a real mechanic, to come over and see the truck and give his opinion.
So Steve came over last night and took a look at the truck, checked everything over as best we could in the driveway. I couldn't get the sound to replicate, of course. I kind of figured I wouldn't be able to. But it did kind of sound like he too thought bearing. The passenger side is where I think I'm hearing it from. But I'm going to take you guys around the block. We'll go around the block in the truck, and I'm going to see if I can get it to do the sound again, just to even make sure for my own sanity before I tear that side apart and put a hub in it that is the sound.
So in order to capture and share with you guys the strange front-end phenomenon I was experiencing, I devised a plan. To risk the life of my GoPro by attaching it to the bottom of the truck and then going for a drive. Best case scenario, we hear the bad sound and see what's causing it. Worst case, I lose a $200 camera and then spend an additional $200 on a repair that I'm not sure is gonna fix the truck.
I have a feeling it's not gonna pick up the sound, especially with how loud this motor is, but it's worth a shot anyway.
With my spy camera in place, I set off to see if the truck would make the noise or if it'd be camera shy.
Yeah, of course, it's not doing it at all. I'm beginning to think maybe that it has something to do with the temperature. Maybe once it warms up quite a bit, it starts to make the noise or something. It's not doing it at all now. Not at all. I don't think the roads are bumpy enough around here.
Feeling confused, but not at all surprised, I went back home, and per Steve and I's discussion, I'm gonna change the whole hub assembly and see if that could be the fix to this strange issue. Back up in the air she goes, where we pull off the gorgeous King Ranch wheels and then attempt to pull the spacers. But the baby DeWalt didn't have the sack to do it.
The DeWalt just ain't cutting it.
The Milwaukee with its massive torque was more than up to the job, so off comes the spacer. And then the caliper, and then we made a discovery.
Yeah, see, this thing just doesn't sound right. I mean, take a listen. Sounds a little rougher than I think it's supposed to.
This reassured me that hopefully all this work wouldn't be for nothing, and that we'd have the truck back on the road in no time. Now we can battle with the rotor to release itself from the hub. This thing is really stuck on there, even though I just did brakes not too long ago. But I finally reign triumphant, and then run into a different battle.
What are the freaking odds I grab 5 of the exact same Allen keys? Same exact size. The heat is getting to me, I think.
A battle I fight every day. My own stupidity. But I finally find the right size, and we can remove the ABS wheel speed sensor. Now we can remove the 4-wheel drive locking hub. This should just pull straight out, but always usually takes a little wiggling to shimmy it out of place.
It doesn't smell great.
And then we found a mess.
Quite a bit of crap in here. Little shiny metal fragments too.
Now it's time for my absolute least favorite part of working on the hub and axle of this thing, removing the large snap ring on the axle stub shaft. An especially fun task with no snap ring pliers. I'd rather set my face on fire and try to put it out with a fork than do this part. This process, even sped up, took a long time. It would have taken me less time to walk 30 minutes each way to Harbor Freight and count out and pay for one of the right tools with pennies. Now we can remove the series of washers behind the snap ring. Next, we can remove the 4 21mm nuts holding the hub assembly to the steering knuckle. Turning the steering wheel in different directions helps get better access to the nuts.
That's what she said!
With them fully removed, the hub assembly can be pulled from the steering knuckle. And we found even more mess.
Freaking finally. There's an awful lot of crap in here. I don't even know what this is. I don't go off-roading in this thing. All right, so I just talked to Steve. He said that's definitely not good, but that as far as the seal part here, I can clean this crap all out of here, use some brake clean, blow that out with some air, and make sure that's nice and clean. I gotta clean this axle shaft, get all the little metal shavings out of there. But as far as this thing, it's kind of a good sign that this is all, you know, leaking powdery metal, because it does mean that it's probably no good and it needed to be replaced.
Especially that inner spindle needle bearing we talked about earlier. Look at how dry those bearings are. just grinding with each other, making that powdery metal dust.
In a way, I was taking my best guess that this was the problem, but it was still kind of a shot in the dark, and all of this could have been for nothing. Well, it still is for nothing. I just jinxed myself. Why do I do this?
The O-ring and seal behind the hub assembly was not in this kind of shape when I last had it out, only 5,000 miles ago or so, which does make me feel better that this is the proper fix to our problem. But before the new hub goes in, I'm going to clean this area the best I can. I'll keep spraying it with compressed air to knock the big bits out of there, and then use brake clean and a rag to wipe up the rest. It's looking so much better.
And now we just wait for UPS or FedEx. No, I believe it's UPS. We wait for them to show up with the bearing. It's supposed to be delivered today. And if it's not, that's a damn shame because I'm taking up a lot of the driveway.
But just a few minutes later, a truck showed up.
And the parts are here. Got a bit of weight to it. Now, I went with the Motorcraft, the Ford one, because I feel like with a bearing or the whole hub assembly, that's not really something you want to cheap out on. And this wasn't cheap to begin with. On Ford, I think it was almost $400.
Never mind. Either I have a really bad memory or inflation has taken its toll in the past few hours.
Rock Auto had it for like $220, $240 shipped or something. I'll include a link for it down below, but ooh, nice, pretty.
Now we can get this shiny new Motorcraft hub assembly back into the truck. We'll get it ready by first hand tightening the studs into the rear of the hub assembly, and then lube up the yellow O-ring with some motor oil and install it into the groove on the hub. I'll lube up the large O-ring in the steering knuckle and lube the axle shaft and needle bearing too. But a slight hiccup arrived.
All right, we're at a little bit of a pause because before I finish buttoning this up, I'm not sure if this ridge down here is supposed to be there. That's right about where the needle bearings sit, that I presume was the culprit of this whole problem. And I'm not sure if that, being as dry as it was and as rough as it was, messed up the axle there. So I'm gonna wait until Steve gets home from work and show him and see what he thinks before I button this thing all up and realize that I shouldn't have done that. All right, so Steve came by last night and had a look at the area here, especially that little groove right there. We're thinking that that's just where the needle bearing that's now worn out rides. It doesn't look messed up and it looks pretty uniform. So what he did tell me to do was clean this surface right here really good, make sure that's nice, flat, smooth. I wasn't supposed to use anti-seize here. I was supposed to use grease. So I'll grease up this shaft here. I'll clean all in here, get the rust and crud out of there so that this is all nice and clean. And then I'll even put a little bit of grease on this mating surface here. That way there's surely nothing getting in here that's gonna destroy the bearing again.
With the help of some emery cloth and then a die grinder, and then more emery cloth, I clean up the face of the knuckle where the new hub's gonna mount, and the axle shaft. It's looking so much better than before. Now, we're almost ready to put in the new hub assembly. But first we put some grease on the axle shaft and interior contact surfaces of the knuckle.
All right, it's all ready now for the new hub to go on. Hopefully it goes smoothly.
First, we line up what's left of the brake rotor rock shield in the right orientation with the rear of the new hub assembly. Once it's started on, and before I forget and be angry about it later, we can now maneuver the ABS sensor wire through the right slot in the dust shield. Which, because I'm not the brightest, was way more difficult than it should have been. Maybe it's because it's 95 degrees out and my hands are sweating like a pregnant nun in these gloves. But once it's finally routed through, I can now push the hub all the way up, and then start on the 4 nuts that hold the hub on. Then torque them down to 60, then 133 foot-pounds in crisscross order. Back on goes the circular washer, the hex-shaped washer, and the last circular washer. And then my favorite, the snap ring. We meet again. You'd think at this point I would have just gone and bought some snap ring pliers, but I love pain. Getting this back on without the proper pliers is about as easy as nailing Jell-O to a wall. But 87.5 years later, I finally get it on and secured it into its groove.
I hate that.
Then I put some grease on the O-ring that's on the four-wheel drive locking hub before reinstalling it back into the hub assembly, followed by the lock ring. Back goes on the rotor and the pads and the caliper. The caliper bolts then get torqued down, and the ABS sensor gets rerouted back up to the fender liner, plugged in, and bolted back to the top of the steering knuckle, at which point the spacer gets bolted back on, and then back goes on the gorgeous King Ranch wheels. And while the truck's up in the air still, I might as well grease all the fittings on the front end parts, like the ball joints and tie rods, and some other zerks I missed on the drive shaft U-joints. And then it goes back on the ground to see if this repair was really what the truck needed, or was this not even where the noise was coming from. Time for a test drive.
All right, we're all buttoned up. I had to change my shirt because it was disgusting and I don't want to get this beautiful interior dirty. But it's time to go around the block, go on a little bit of a test drive and see how everything is. I hope it's good.
My spy camera once again sacrificing its life for the greater good of the F350, we set off.
I'm not going to say a word until we've driven at least 5 minutes. Let everything warm up, make sure the tire doesn't fall off.
This is because when it was making the noise before, it had been after I'd already put some miles on it. The noise was starting when everything got hot.
It's driving really smooth. I hit a pretty decent sized bump a second ago and it didn't rattle the truck to death. I don't hear anything on that side. It feels a little smoother, but that could be mental.
I went around some curvy roads and hit every bump I could find. Even tried forward and reverse to see if I could get the truck to act up.
I don't know, it seems pretty smooth. Here's the straightaway, so I guess we'll get up to round highway speeds and see if it does anything. Come on, 7.3. What a noise! It seems smooth. No noises. It seems smooth. Sometimes my genius even scares myself. Jeremy Clarkson said that one, and I'm emphasizing it. Test drive went smooth. Tire didn't fall off. I don't smell anything burning.
I've been dailying the truck for the past week and taking it on some pretty long drives. And I'm happy to report, no issues. It's fixed. For now.
Feels good to finally win one with this truck. We'll see you guys in the next one. Happy motoring.